Well, and welcome to the Pick Six Podcast. The portal coming with football and basketball. We've already talked about basketball in the Half Court Press Podcast. I hope you listened to that. The heavy hitter, Tom Shatel. Over to my right, the silver tongue, the statesman, Evan Bland. Over here to my left, fresh off of covering another Nebraska baseball loss.
Why are you laughing? Yeah.
To UNO. Well, it's kind of funny. It is. They got all this money and all these players and all these, NIL deals and a collective, and UNO comes down to Haymarket Park and beats them twice.
That's true.
That's right. They've won the season series. Am I right?
They've clinched it.
Oh my goodness gracious. So we'll talk definitely about some baseball on the back end here. What exactly is going on with a team that tends to do pretty well against the good teams, but tends to really struggle against some of the worst teams on their schedule, and so we'll get into that. We're going to talk Husker football off the top. They got a commit from Ashton Murphy. They're probably going to try to pursue a couple of more, so we'll talk a little recruiting. We'll talk transfer portal, too. Nebraska, the transfer portal in college football opens on Saturday. And Nebraska is way over the limit. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk a little bit of tackling, whatever Tom's interested in. And the Big Ten's got a new commissioner. So we'll go over that as well. I want to remind everybody to listen to the Half Court Press Podcast. Why? Because we talk about Nebraska basketball over there with Joel Lorenzi, who ran down why Ryan Emhard left and what Creighton's going to do to try to replace him. I talked about all the players that Nebraska is looking at in the transfer portal to potentially add to this team. I do think there's going to be some movement this weekend and next weekend on that front. You'll have to listen to the Half Court Press Podcast, though, to tune in. That's where to find it. Okay, we'll start off the top with Nebraska football. We'll go right to the transfer portal. So Nebraska is almost all the way through its spring camp. Tom and I yesterday were talking about it. Feels like the dog days of spring camp. Everybody's winding down a little bit, and I think people are getting a little like, okay, let's get this over with. Let's watch a football game next Saturday. Let's welcome Frank Solich back to Memorial Stadium. Let's have a party, a welcome home party, and then let's move into the offseason. That's kind of how I'm feeling, to be very honest with you. So that's kind of where things are at right now. But this Saturday is something that may really move things. You wrote a really good story on Monday about a rule that allows Matt Rhule or any coach to potentially offload some of their players if those players are not interested in making a decision on their own.
Yeah, any first-year coach. That's sort of the thing, and that's why it really hasn't been on the radar of anybody, at least externally in the Nebraska sphere. It's a quirky rule that was designed for basketball about 13 years ago, where they wanted to encourage players to stay in school and get their school paid for if their coach left, and it has expanded over the last few years to the point now to where essentially Matt Rhule or any other first-year coach in a scholarship sport can not invite a student athlete to come back and say, we don't want you on the team anymore. You're still in school. Your scholarship is still valid. You're going to get your education, but you're not on the team, and your scholarship will no longer count against the 85. And so it doesn't mean Nebraska and Matt Rhule will utilize that rule, but it means they could utilize that rule. And you mentioned Nebraska being way over. You got to get down to the 85-man limit by the time fall camp starts in July. Right now, it's hard to say exactly because some guys go on and off scholarship by semester, and they don't always publicize.
And there's a little bit of NIL money in there that can pay for
NIL money is a factor as well.
Young man's tuition.
But they're right around 98 right now, and that's without factoring in any other additions that they make through the portal in the next few months. So just something to watch, right? It opens Saturday. I thought Matt Rhule's comments this week about the transfer portal were interesting.
What did he say?
Well, he said he hadn't really been thinking about it, which, I mean, how could you not? I think maybe it was more in that moment he wasn't thinking about it. But they're going to go through the spring game, and then in the week following, they'll have conversations with everyone on the team about their future, their role. So it'll be interesting. There's that week between Saturday and the spring game on the 22nd where players could, in theory, see the writing on the wall and leave of their own volition, or they could play through the spring game, have that discussion with the coaches, and then move on from that point. But there's no doubt, whether forced or willingly, Nebraska's going to see some departures in the next 10 to 15 days.
This is the life of college football.
That's the runoff rule. And they've been running off guys for 80 to 100 years. I mean, Tom Osborne did it. They all did it. And they just go up to a kid and just politely say, or maybe not politely, get the hell out of here. You're not going to play. But yeah, they've gotten rid of kids for years. So I'm glad there's a rule now that allows you to do that legally.
Just the first time, the first year. Yeah, it is. I mean, this is the nature of the sport now, though, right? Like, I mean, this is what college football's become. We don't really have. So we have NIL, which I like. I don't like that there are no rules around transferring. I don't like the free agency. Well, like, anybody can leave, go anywhere they want, anytime they want, and you don't even get that in the NFL.
Anytime there's a first-year coach, the guys move. They don't like the way things are, or the practices are too tough, or they weren't too tough for the last couple coaches. But they just don't like. They're not going to play. They don't like their position coach. They don't want this or that. There's always turnover. People, always leave. My question: what if they like the new coach and they don't want to leave? What if they want to stay?
Well, people like Nebraska. I mean, it's.
But I'm just saying.
You mean I don't get to be a part of the new facility?
The receiver came back and said, "Well, I was leaving, but I like Rhule. I'm going to come back." I mean, what if a lot of those guys do that? I believe first of all, I think Saturday's practice is going to be a ball buster. I think they might try to run some guys off Saturday.
It's possible.
But by playing really hard and tough to see who wants to do it and getting after some guys because the portal is coming and it's going to be wild and crazy. So, will guys transfer next week before the spring game? Sure. But it's an interesting, thing. Would you go through the spring game and, maybe give another team something to look at, or are you afraid of getting hurt? And nobody wants you. So, the next 2 weeks for that roster will be interesting. But if they go into the portal, what are they looking for? What does Matt Rhule want out of the portal right now?
Well, offensive tackle.
Yeah.
I think, because I'm not sure they have more than 3. And they're going to add some guys this summer, but you can't anticipate any of those freshmen getting it done. And then, I mean, if there's a guy that really wants to be here on the defensive side of the ball, a linebacker or a pass rusher, I don't think they would say no.
Right.
I think they're pretty good at running back, certainly good at quarterback. Wide receiver, they're going to bank on the freshmen. Tight ends, they feel good.
Yep.
What if a running back comes open or wants to transfer?
It'd have to be a darn good one.
Right.
Like, it'd have to be somebody that was really above and beyond what they think they have in the room.
And there aren't that many guys in college football like that anymore.
No. And usually they hold on to them.
I agree. I think they're set.
Linebacker or offensive tackle.
Yeah.
Conversely, and the coaches have said this before, they feel like there are a lot of defensive backs in the room or on the team currently. We've talked about quarterback before. You would think those positions at some point would see some guys who would want to find an opportunity elsewhere as well. But I bet we'll get a surprise or two too. I mean, you talk about like how you can view like the tight end room or the running back room as a room of strength. Sometimes guys can perceive that to mean they're not going to have a chance to get on the field.
Is there a quarterback who's going to transfer?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
There's 6 of them.
Probably 2.
Yeah. I think
Who?
4 quarterback. Well, it's a tricky conversation because
Torres?
I don't think that would be their desire, but I think that could happen. I think it's a tricky conversation because you don't really know. Casey Thompson has 1 more year of football. What does Casey want to do? He's not, last year, regardless of what anybody said, he was going to be a high-level competitor to be the starter. Everybody kind of knew he was going to be the starter. That's not the case this year. And so what does he want to do? That's one. And then I think it's inevitable that somewhere in between the Smothers and the Harburg, and who am I forgetting?
Well, Purdy's already transferred once, so that's a little bit more of a complicated
Purdy can't
talk.
really easily transfer unless he gets the waiver. Now, with this new coach thing, I think he can probably get the waiver. What can Purdy do? Those kind of things. So it's somewhere in the Smothers, Harburg, Purdy conversation, I think you lose one. And then the question becomes, what does Thompson do? Like, what does he want to do? And we don't really know. Like, the idea that we know for sure is, I just don't think it's true. I think his dad gave an interview, and I just don't think that's. No. I think a lot's changed since then, and I think we're 4 months in, and it's just a different conversation, and we'll just have to see what he wants to do.
He has seen Jeff Sims up close in practice enough now to know whether he can beat this guy out or not, or he's got a pretty good feel for how that's going to go in August, and he has a good feel for the offense and what they want and what they would expect out of him, and whether he can do it. Namely run the ball on occasion. It's fascinating because we don't get NIL numbers, specific numbers, but everything we've heard is that he's doing very well. And would he do as well somewhere else? Would he? He's from Norman, and he's played at Texas. Is he a Southwest kind of guy, a Big 12 kind of guy? Does he think, I've got one more year, I can beat this kid out? I kind of like these new coaches and the new offense, and I'm very comfortable in Lincoln. I don't know. But he didn't have Trey Palmer. Does that make a difference? I don't know.
I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, Sam. I would be surprised if Casey Thompson transferred. It's his last year. He's already transferred once. He's invested in this staff. The coaches have already said how he lives in North Stadium studying film. Yeah. Jeff Sims, when he spoke a couple weeks ago, complimented Casey Thompson as being a leader and a guy who's helped him settle into what he's doing. So I don't see I don't see a scenario where he transfers. He's making six figures in NIL, as he hinted to a year ago. And there's the reality that when you run the quarterback, as much as Nebraska has and appears that it wants to, the backup's going to factor in pretty often.
And he was hurt last year too, so they needed another guy. I agree with you. I just I've been through this portal enough though that I'm not surprised by anything. So I think next week and the week after the spring game will be interesting.
Breaking news that we cut into. I said we weren't going to talk about Nebraska basketball, but we will. I'm not exactly sure how to say his name, but Bradley center Rink Mast has committed to transfer to Nebraska. Multiple people put that out there. I've confirmed that now.
What's his name again?
Well, it's Rink. Rink Mast. 6'9". Let's see where we got it here. 6'9", 240. Very similarly sized to Derek Walker. Maybe a little taller.
Dutch.
And, yeah, he's Dutch.
Double machine at Bradley.
Averaged 14 points, 8 rebounds, and 2.5 assists last season for a good team. A team that, quite frankly,
they were good.
Was better than Nebraska. They lost in the Mo Valley.
They couldn't beat Drake in the final, but you're right. They won the league. Okay.
So a good player.
Now get your Richard Van Polgeest lines out, all you former Husker fans out there. The old oldsters. He was also Dutch, I believe.
He was probably the last one.
The late 80s, yeah.
So this guy's, a reasonable. He's a decent 3-point shooter. He doesn't he's not a volume 3-point shooter per se, but he's a 33% 3-point shooter in his career, which you'll live with, and so that'll be an interesting an addition in Nebraska. The question now becomes, does Pittsburgh center John Hughley join the program? I think there's still question marks about his knee and all those things. He was slated to visit next week. Mast basically was down to Iowa and Nebraska. Iowa took a guy from Valpo instead of Mast, and I think that meant Mast was going to go to Nebraska.
Well, that's a good start for Hoiberg.
Yes, it's decent. I think the Missouri Valley and the Big Ten are two very different leagues, and so the things he was able to get done there won't be quite as easy at Nebraska because you're playing in the Big Ten. But I think he's a skilled big man in the mold of what Derek Walker became at Nebraska. We'll just have to see how it goes. So we'll have some coverage on that coming up. Okay, so let's talk. Speaking of commits, Ashton Murphy, Elkhorn South, offensive tackle, defensive end, two-way lineman, was being recruited by other teams as an offensive tackle. Not coming to Nebraska as that. Coming to Nebraska as a defensive lineman. What do we think?
Well, I think it just sort of continues the trend of what Matt Rhule and Nebraska want to do. You start in state, and historically there are offensive and defensive lineman talent that comes out of that, and Murphy's been that guy. He's someone that I didn't speak to him when he committed, but I've spoken to him before. I know he's been to Nebraska a number of times, and I don't know. It seems like the kind of commit you need to get. I mean, he's someone who can be developed, who's familiar with this place, and again, I feel like the value of in-state recruiting in some ways is increased in this portal area. We're talking about transferring, like the guys that are more invested in the program, that grew up around the program, that live nearby. Like those are the guys that tend to stick things out and want to be in it for the long haul. And it seems like, as a guy who grew up locally, who's followed the Huskers, Ashton Murphy seems like somebody who's bought in, and it'll be interesting to see how he develops over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, I think the idea that you're going to continue to recruit in-state linemen is a really good one. I think that's an area where Nebraska can continue to get better and continue to get better and continue to get better at just being able to attract those players. They offered Eric Ingwerson, the Papillion La Vista tight end, who could play either tight end or outside linebacker or like an edge rusher position for Nebraska. I don't know that he's going to necessarily flip to Nebraska, but these are the kind of bodies that are built in this state. Mm-hmm. Like you can find a lot of guys that are 6'4", 6'5", 230, 240, 250 that then you put weight on, or if they're athletic enough, they become a tight end. And these are the kinds of things that that's what Nebraska, that's the kind of kids that are in Nebraska. You don't have a ton of elite defensive linemen. And by that I mean you don't have a ton of 6'4", 307-pound, uber athletic guys.
Sure.
You don't have a ton of great, corners. Avante Dickerson a couple years ago, there's been a couple, but what Nebraska has a lot of is offensive tackle and tight end bodies. They have that, and they've got some defensive outer edge bodies. It's harder to find that. Tyson Terry might be that guy in the interior, but I'm not sure. He's because you got to get to a certain size, and so that'll be a challenge all its own. So we'll see what happens there. But I kind of like what they've done there so far. Anything else jump out at you at Nebraska football practice?
Well, I mean, I kind of agree. We've reached the dog days portion of practice, and it's been different because we've had a chance to see 30 or 40 minutes every week, which is not the way that it was under the previous staff, where it felt like then, any chance you got in there, which was maybe twice a year, more like once a year, it seems like, you had to soak in everything you possibly could. I feel like we've gotten, a good sense of what this staff's about, gotten to know the coaches some. I guess I was talking to somebody yesterday about how, looking back, as we've seen all the coaches introduced, the guy that I felt like was the most different from when he was at the podium to when we've seen him in practice was Garrett McGuire, who spoke yesterday. I mean, it felt like, I think in hindsight, he was maybe a little bit nervous that first day, just showing up in the sixth floor of Memorial Stadium. But seeing him out working individual drills and how he coaches technique and encouragement or insight or feedback on every single rep that they do, and he'll jump in and do it himself. Like, I think I've changed my mind a little bit on him. I mean, the fact that he's 24 years old, it still applies. The relative lack of experience, but you see him in action. You see, Matt Rhule mentioned even again the other day when Nebraska ran its 7-on-7 portion of practice, it was Garrett McGuire who was running that portion of the offense. It wasn't Marcus Satterfield. So I think seeing him in his element has been helpful, at least to me, in sort of seeing what Rhule has seen in McGuire and why they're so optimistic about what he can be for the receivers and for the offense.
Yeah, I think the comment he made about recruiting and having that, that they're getting hurt in recruiting because he doesn't have. They're just hearing this narrative about his age is really interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought the opposite.
No, I'm the opposite. That's what you expect. If you're going to hire a guy that young, other teams are going to go after him, and they're going to attack his youth, and that's okay. That's what you expect. But then, like he said, when he starts producing NFL receivers, everybody can then shut up. I think what's interesting is if they get the kids to visit, and they get to meet him, Larry Martin, the Omaha North coach, told me he met Garrett, and he said the high school kids love him. They love his youth. They love that he's their age, and they can all relate to him. So you can't worry about the other schools. The other schools are going to bash. Of course they're going to bash. How can you? That guy can't teach you anything. He's only 24. Well, what are you going to learn from him? Of course they're going to say that. But get the players in and meet him, and they'll decide for themselves. I mean, there's something going on there. I'm interested because the guy has snacks. I want to see what the snacks are. Hot fries. Giving hot fries. All right. Well, how about we do a little one-on-one interview?
What's your favorite? Fries. What's your favorite snack? What would be the snack you'd want to have in there?
I mean, the snack. The question is, what would the snack you'd have around?
Yeah.
I'd probably have M&Ms. I mean, that's probably my deal. But
so he said hot fries.
Yeah, I think he means hot fries in a bag.
I'm sure they've got a kitchen.
Okay.
They just right.
Yeah, the way he said it was hot fries. So if you said hot fries, I think how you would say it would inform what it was. Yeah.
Hot fries in a bag.
Like in the moment when I heard him say that, I thought he was talking about like French fries.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not what it is. But
it doesn't matter with the kids. They just want whatever's going to burn their tongue.
I think if it gets them in there to watch film, it's great.
That's right.
To hang out. The whole idea is to create an atmosphere that the receivers are all one big family. Whether he's the big brother or the dad, it doesn't matter. But he's in charge, and I mean, it's fascinating. We don't have to make any conclusions on him right now. I just sit back and take notes and observe, and I think it's fascinating. But other schools are going to go after him. Who cares? The kids are the ones who tell the truth.
How about his comment about sharing the remote in his office and letting some of the other guys, the receivers, sit in his chair and scroll through the videos? Like, if 40, 50-year-old coach isn't giving up the remote, isn't giving up his seat, probably, right? Like, that's something a young guy does.
Everybody has a different style. Again, it's fascinating. I mean, can it work? Absolutely. Maybe that's how today's kid wants to be coached. Some want to be, Ed Foley will do it differently than Garrett McGuire, but that's the beauty of it. They all coach for the head guy, Matt Rhule, and they all do it his way. But how many of these have we done? A lot of them. We've seen different styles and different coaches, and this is definitely different. And I think it's great. It's a character. We don't always get to see characters. And what the heck? How can you not like the guy? He calls everybody sir.
He does. Ask how everybody's doing. Very straightforward in that way.
The Big Ten has a new commissioner as of just now. They announced it. I mean, we knew yesterday, but
Tony. How do you pronounce his name?
Tony Petitti.
Tony Petitti.
Yep.
Okay. Right.
Worked for MLB. He was the number 2 to Rob Manfred. Worked for CBS. Worked for Fox, I think, at one point. Was recently working for Activision Blizzard, which is a video game company that does Call of Duty. And recently had joined a company called the 33rd, which I think was a sort of a consulting firm that sort of worked with television networks. The Big Ten was going to make an outside-the-box hire. Jim Phillips obviously got a pay bump to stay with the ACC, But at the end of the day, I don't think Jim Phillips was going to be the hire, because if he had been the hire, he would have hired him right away. And Jim Phillips obviously would have come back. And so I think Jim Phillips kind of leveraged what had happened, and he was able to go back to the ACC. But the Big Ten was always going to go in this direction, same direction the Pac-12 and the Big 12 have gone in, with sort of their hires, going with television executives, outside-the-box thinkers. What are the challenges at this moment, Tom, for a Big Ten commissioner following Kevin Warren, following expansion, going into a new TV deal? So he's not going to. A couple of dominoes have already fallen for this guy. What does he come in and do to make his imprint?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things, but I think clearly the message here is the Big Ten presidents are like owners of the NFL or Major League Baseball. They hire a commissioner. They don't care about anything except that they want more money. They bring in a guy to bring them more money. Make them richer, not rich, but richer, and then that's what this is all about. The climate is just getting going in college sports, where we're talking about realignment doesn't have a lot of places to go, but it's not done. TV, there's a whole world outside the box, and we're just scratching. USC. The LA market to the Big Ten is just scratching the surface. They brought this guy in to see what else is out there. The Big Ten, besides liking money, they like this new world where anything's possible. And that's so unlike the Big Ten, right? They just wanted to be the Big Ten, but now they want to be other things. In my mind, no more expansion. I think maybe down the road, I don't think Oregon or Washington really add much to the Big Ten war chest or the brand. Maybe down the road you'd add possibly a Miami, or Florida State doesn't quite fit the profile. It's interesting to see. I think instead of adding, I think there's only one addition left, and that's Notre Dame.
And
and then I think
they'll go to 17 if they can get 17, but they're not going to 18 just to go to 18.
But this guy, Notre Dame listens to money and TV. He could come in and somehow make a Notre Dame partnership with the Big Ten work with TV. I think the other big thing that's out there, way out there, is a Big Ten SEC partnership, a TV contract where they're both together, separate leagues. And I think we're getting to a place where the Big Ten SEC are going to be too big for everybody else. They may get made to go do their own thing. How does that work? That's why this guy was brought in. He's a TV entertainment thinker, outside the box guy. What else is out there? Well, what's possible? Big Ten is a TV show now. It's college sports. College football is a TV show. It has been. And
true.
My thing is, people, well, what's work USC into the league? What's make everybody happy? This guy hasn't really done a lot of that. He's done some, but I think the key is, okay, if Big Ten football is a TV show, it needs to be a better show. It needs to have national champion more. It needs to have some national champions, and it needs. And I think bring USC into the fold. Let them help teach the Big Ten about because a lot of these Big Ten we did. Nebraska was brought in for that reason, but Nebraska has not pulled it off because they've lost. They've been losing. Mm-hmm. But you bring in a USC. We're going to recruit nationally. We're about making the playoff. We're about national championships and Heisman's. Bring that into that is going to rub off more on the Big Ten schools. So I think let USC be USC. Don't try to put them in a corner. Let them do their thing and expand TV and make more money. That's kind of it.
You're gonna have some takes today on that decision. I'll be curious to watch the press conference when I get a chance to. My sense is that everything that you said is just true, and they're gonna have to. I think that the other thing he's going to be tasked with is positioning the Big Ten if we ever go to a revenue sharing program where the athletes stop doing NIL for the large part and they just share revenue,
right?
That's going to be by league. It's not going to be one of these. I guarantee you it will not be by school. It'll be the league is going to dole out the money and they'll do it. Well, and it'll, all those
it's going to be professional, right? It's already getting that way. And athletes will become employees. You bring a guy in from the pros, the networks and the MLB, and the Big Ten and the SEC are going to be in the best position to do that, to make that work. I don't know about the ACC or the Big 12 or what the Pac-12 is like, how that works. But college football could have some very strange years ahead where two leagues are way up on top and the national championship is still everybody, but two leagues have all the money and all the power and all the bids. It's a weird place. I don't necessarily like it, but it's where we are. And Nebraska's in a good place. I think Nebraska will like this commissioner more. There won't be there won't be a pandemic to keep them from playing, and hopefully, knock on wood. And but I also think that
this guy's not going to work with the presidents and the chancellors. This guy is an AD pick, and he's going to work with the ADs
all
the way.
Great. Right.
Yeah.
And that's great. I also think Nebraska will like the Big Ten more when Nebraska starts winning, and hopefully that's coming.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I would add too is that we've talked before about how the Big Ten loves being the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. The Big Ten loves itself some Big Ten. This is not a traditional Big Ten move. I mean, it really signals the way that college athletics is going. If you're the Big Ten and you're bringing in that guy, and you think about even 5, 6, 7 years ago, the value in a commissioner hire, one of the top priorities was institutional knowledge. Do you have a sense of how the presidents and chancellors work? Do you have a sense of the area? Do you know the schools? And now none of that matters. It's all about innovation. It's about making money. It's about how can you creatively position yourself in uncertain terrain. Like, to me, it's just another really clear sign of how much in flux everything still is.
Well, and go ahead, Tom.
No, I was going to say, Jim Delaney taught the Big Ten how to love money, and Kevin Warren took that to a whole other level. That was his job to breed. Now this guy is brought in to take it to another level. So, yeah, it's where we are. Are things like student athlete, wellness and taking care of all the athletes and all the big fancy libraries and the academic standings aren't the all that stuff is so important. Sure, it'll always be, but when they brought in USC, UCLA, that signaled a new day that the Big Ten is ready to cross over, and they want to get after it. They want the money, they want the power, and hopefully the football product will now evolve as well.
Well, we have one last topic, and that's baseball. Nebraska baseball is an interesting case. They are, what are they, 18-11 or 18-12?
18-11-1.
18-11-1. They've got some really good wins on their resume. And then they've got some terrible losses. There's really, and it's different when it's an in-state team, but they've got 2 to UNO and 1 to Creighton. And I don't think the loss to Abilene Christian is bad. I think that team's pretty good.
They're an at-large team.
But, I don't think the San Diego losses are going to hold up well. That team's not very good.
Agreed.
And there might have been another one in there, and I'm just blanking on who that would have been. But this is a team that knows how to get up to take 2 of 3 from Michigan at Michigan. Not an easy place to play, but a team with talent, and has lost 2 straight at home to UNO. What's the deal?
Well, there's the mental side, which is that, and I hear it every time from Creighton and from UNO players and coaches. They'll say, when it's the Nebraska game, it's just different. There's more of an intensity. They play, UNO you look at some of their attendance games, they play in front of a few hundred people a game. And they played in front of more than 5,000 on Tuesday night. And so, like, it's just different. And for Nebraska, it's the opposite, right? You talk about coming off of the Michigan series, then, you got to play UNO, and then you got to turn around and get ready for the Big Ten again. And they've always had, especially the last few years, they've had a really difficult time locking in for those in-state teams. And I was even struck last night talking with Mike Bovey from Omaha, who's going to be a high draft pick here in a few months. He's hitting over 400, elite player.
Maybe the best player on the field every time UNO plays Nebraska. He, Max Anderson, Bryce Matthews are the three best
Absolutely
players.
Right. And, he would not. I asked him a couple different times about just sort of playing Nebraska and do they get up for it. And he was more focused on his swing and more focused on, like, the kind of daily mechanical stuff that goes into a baseball season than he was beating Nebraska. And I think Nebraska's just not gotten to that point where they still kind of ride the roller coaster a little bit. You get up for Michigan, you play well, you have that lull against Omaha, there's frustration, and I bet they get up for Northwestern this weekend. But it's been confounding. I know it's a hot topic for fans when you lose to the in-state school, especially one with an RPI in like the 240s like Omaha has. But I think it also just kind of says from Nebraska's perspective that they're kind of what they've been in the past, which is a top-heavy team on a Friday night when Emmett Olson's on the mound and the offense is clicking. They can beat anybody, as we saw with their win over Vanderbilt. That remains by far their best this year. But there's just not the depth. You can't trust the bullpen necessarily from day to day. There's not this sustainability that you see in some of the top programs. So I think they can still contend to win the Big Ten, but when you drop 2 at home to Omaha and you still have another with the Mavs, you have Creighton still on the schedule, I think Nebraska's sort of settling into this spot where being an at-large team at this point with an RPI in the 90s is becoming a bigger long shot with every passing week.
So you think that this is getting closer and closer to they're going to have to go to the Big Ten tournament and win it?
Or win the Big Ten regular season. I think if they do that, history would still say that the committee would look favorably upon that. You're winning a power conference. But I don't think, unless they go on a big run in the second half, I don't see them boosting their RPI to the point to where it's in the top 40, which is where you need to be an at-large team and getting in. I think you got to take care of the business in the league at this point, and the at-large conversation, it's not totally dead, but I think it's on life support.
What does Will Bolt mean when he's talking about mindset? So the quote last night was, doesn't matter if it's an in-state game or an out-of-state game, we have to have the same mindset. And he was like, we had terrible mindset from the position players. Mm-hmm. What is he talking about?
It kind of reminds me of what Darren Erstad used to say, which was, and he always said this too, or he said that we're never good enough to just roll the balls out there and think that we can win. And I think there's that temptation at a place like Nebraska where you have all the support stuff, where people tell you that you should win those games, that you can just kind of show up and do your thing. And, Will expanded on that the other night by saying he didn't feel like, from the position players' perspective especially, that they were being aggressive. Like it's a different approach than if they were playing Michigan. Maybe not that same intensity, that same urgency, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't there. They weren't good situationally, and we've heard it. They've said it in the last couple of years too, where it's like, okay, we fell behind by a couple runs, and then it hit us. We got to get this thing going, and it was too late. They came back from 5 down to tie it. They probably stayed with their closer, Shea Shanneman, just a little bit too long. He went 4 innings, and Omaha took the lead late. So there just wasn't that sense of urgency. And again, I just think the mental side of it, where those other schools, Creighton and Omaha, this is when they play Nebraska, the circumstances are different. They're unusual. They're more intense. And for Nebraska, it's oftentimes the opposite. I think that's reflected in how we've seen them perform.
Early in that game, so we do this a lot in football, where we will talk about moments early in a game or in a game where it's like, what were you thinking? What were you doing? There's a moment early in that game where this doesn't happen necessarily often in baseball, but it did in this case, where I think a mistake was made. When you're charging a ball the way that you tell me who it is, the left
Charlie Fisher in right
is in right field. is charging that ball. We don't talk about this stuff a lot in baseball because baseball is too numbers driven, in my opinion. And I like it, but it's too numbers driven, and so we don't talk about this. But from my perspective, that play changed the entire tenor of that game. Why would you do that in that first inning like that? What are we trying? What was that trying to be a web jam, or what was going on there?
Yeah, you're trying to make a play. The wind was blowing the other way, so I think there was probably a sense of misjudgment there too. He's coming in, the wind is knocking the ball down, and you could see when he dove that he was short, obviously, and the ball rolled by him and went to the wall. So I think he was making a play. I don't know. I personally didn't have a huge issue with it. It was the first inning. It did lead to one run, but that shouldn't be the thing that beats you unless we're having the conversation of Nebraska football the last 2 years where one thing doesn't go your way and you fall apart mentally. I don't know. I think it was a guy who didn't make a play. Probably more than anything, it hurt the guy who was starting, Caleb Clark, a true freshman who has not had a lot of success, and suddenly through really no fault of his own, he falls behind 1-0. The defense lets him down in the second inning, turns a double play ball into another run. And then the wind blows a Mike Bovee fly ball out to left for a 2-run shot in the third. So it sort of snowballed on him. I suppose you could make that argument. Personally, though, I thought the play, if you think you can make the play, and maybe the wind was a factor in knocking that thing down.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of go about it. And I'm not trying to knock that kid. Obviously, you're trying to make a play there. I think just the thought process of time and situation. We will take a kid apart in a football game with 37 seconds left for not running out of bounds and staying in bounds, time and situation. Oh my God, we'll take a coach apart for something very, very pecuniary in a football game. But it almost feels in base there's every play is an isolated event, and I just don't. I think sometimes those things can accumulate over time, and I felt like that was a moment where you're if you just don't make the play, and you're just in front of it, they probably won't score a run.
Probably not. Yeah, it would have been 1st and 2nd with 2 outs. They probably would have gotten out of it.
Yeah, there's little stuff like that. And of course, a bad throw is a bad throw, but and it has nothing to do with the player himself. I think when I think about what are we thinking about there, I think that goes back to the coaches. Are they communicated in that circumstance? Hey, the one thing you can't have is anything getting behind you. And I don't know.
Well, I just think
but you would agree that we dissect this relentlessly in football.
Yes.
And that's about the only sport we'll do it in. We won't do it in volleyball. We won't do it. It's
basketball,
almost
probably would.
We'll do it a little bit in basketball, but it's nobody knows why anybody wins or loses in the volleyball match other than somebody got this number of kills and there was this number of days. We don't talk about game theory in other sports as much as we do football. And that was just an interesting moment.
That's true.
You're playing a team that you can't give them any life, and then you give them life.
The other thing that I tweeted out last night, college baseball is just a tricky kind of an odd thing because the whole idea of a midweek is that you're putting sort of your second wave of players out there, especially from a pitching perspective. And just look at last night on its own. Oklahoma State, ranked team, loses to Oral Roberts, which is actually a pretty good team. Florida Gulf Coast, top 15 team, loses to Florida Atlantic. UCLA loses to Pepperdine. Texas loses to Texas State. These are all teams that are going to make regionals that lost to teams that may not. So there is an element of this is college baseball that goes into that.
Yeah.
But when it's the in-state factor, when you're trying to do what Nebraska's trying to do, and Omaha is not. Omaha, their whole season at this point is go to the conference tournament, win the auto bid. That's what they're playing for at this point.
That's what they always play for.
Right. And whereas Nebraska's trying to build in that large spot, I think that's
what Creighton always plays for now too.
That's what pisses people off when Nebraska loses those games.
Yeah.
What do you think, Tom?
That's just part of being in this league. There's no margin for error. You can't slip up, and because you can't make it up in the conference. There's not enough good games, not enough good wins left. So that's just kind of where they are. They have to be more perfect, and they clearly aren't. I think they're a pretty good team. They've got some good wins, but they were in a position where if they were on the bubble, the Vanderbilt win could help, but they got to put themselves in the position, and they're not doing it. I just think the mentality that Will Bolt's teams played with Van Horn was they were always on. They may lose a game, but they always showed up. They're always on. They didn't take any nights off, and these guys have not learned that yet. And he has not built the kind of culture yet for that to happen. So it's hard to do.
And again, I'm not trying to be hard on the kid. It's just that kind of stuff. I hurt, and then you're right. When you don't have a team that's ready to go at the plate for 4 innings, they just don't get it done. That's a good offense, a really good offense actually. And I don't give a crap who Uno puts out there. And they have one great pitcher, but he didn't pitch last night.
No, he didn't.
You need to be able to tee off for 14 runs. I think that's what Bolt was talking about. We need to be able to score 14 runs against this team.
Yes. And that's how you do it in the midweek if you're a good team. Because you're still saving your best guys for the weekend.
Right.
But either you have that depth or your offense just overwhelms, and you see that among the top teams.
All right. That is our Pick 6 podcast for this week. We will have more on the Rink Mast commit on our site. And baseball and all the rest, they host Northwestern, terrible Northwestern. And Nebraska football keeps rolling on toward the spring game. We'll be back next week to talk about the return of Frank Solich to Memorial Stadium. For Tom and Evan, I'm Sam. Take care.